You stop to consider the monuments of your life, the achievements, the accolades, the applause. They glitter, enticing and loud, promising fulfillment. Yet, beneath their shine, a quiet dissonance lingers. Why does success often feel hollow? Why does the validation of others, the trophies won, or the milestones reached so frequently fail to settle the restless turbulence within? You seek transformation, yet it eludes you, slipping through your grasp like sand. Perhaps, you ask, the root of this unrest lies not in the world outside, but in the world within. What if true change, the profound metamorphosis you crave, begins not with the accumulation of external proof, but with the delicate, arduous task of knowing yourself? It doesn't start with applause. It doesn't start with recognition or conquest. The journey to self-understanding is quiet, often invisible, and frequently misunderstood. It is a venture into the shadows where the self resists illumination. You stop to ask, how well do I truly know the one who inhabits my own skin? The kind of knowledge that transforms is not the kind gathered by surface observation or fleeting impressions. It is the kind that demands courage, the courage to confront the raw, unvarnished truths that dwell beneath your conscious mind. Not because these truths are comfortable, but because they are necessary. In a world that celebrates noise, speed, and spectacle, you stop to recognize the paradox. The most significant victory is the one won in silence, in solitude, in the stillness of introspection. It doesn't come from changing circumstances, but from changing the way you see yourself in relation to those circumstances. The kind of self-understanding that matters is not a trophy to display, but a foundation to build upon. Without it, every external success is but a fragile edifice, susceptible to collapse under the weight of doubt or loss. You stop to realize that the illusions of selfhood, those stories you tell yourself and others, often obscure rather than reveal your true nature. They are the masks worn to shield vulnerability, to project strength, or to conform to expectations. Yet masks, by their very design, separate you from the depth of your being. They do not invite clarity, they invite confusion. The kind of clarity you seek is not the clarity of certainty about external outcomes, but the clarity of presence within yourself. It is the kind of clarity that allows you to see your fears, your desires, your strengths, and your limitations without flinching or fleeing. Why, then, do you stop short of this inner inquiry? Perhaps it is because the path inward is strewn with discomfort. You stop because you fear what you might find, the contradictions, the wounds, the unhealed parts of your soul. Yet, the kind of growth you desire cannot flourish in the fertile soil of avoidance. It demands acknowledgement, acceptance, and ultimately, transformation. Not because the self is broken beyond repair, but because it is dynamic and complex, requiring constant tending and care. The kind of transformation that lasts is not imposed from outside, nor is it a sudden epiphany. It is a gradual unfolding, a peeling away of layers, like the slow reveal of a hidden landscape beneath the surface of a still lake. You stop to see that this process is not linear. It is cyclical, spiraling deeper into understanding with each turn. Each moment of self-awareness is a step toward freedom, not from life's challenges, but from your habitual reactions to them. You stop to question the very metrics by which you have measured your worth. If you have tied your value to external achievements, what happens when those achievements fade or are no longer attainable? The kind of worth that depends on applause is fragile and conditional. It doesn't endure when the crowd disperses or the accolades cease. The kind of worth that sustains comes from within, from a grounded sense of self that is not shaken by the shifting tides of fortune. You stop to contemplate the paradox that true transformation often feels like loss before it feels like gain. You must lose the illusion of control, the attachment to outcomes, and the stories that no longer serve you. It doesn't mean giving up ambition or purpose, but redefining them through the lens of inner clarity. The kind of clarity that allows you to pursue goals without losing yourself in the process. You stop to consider the nature of change itself. It is not something that can be forced or rushed. It is a natural unfolding that requires patience, presence, and a willingness to face discomfort. The kind of self-understanding you seek is akin to tending a garden, not pulling weeds once and for all, but continually nurturing growth, observing what thrives and what withers, and adjusting your care accordingly. You stop to realize that self-understanding is not a solitary act of self-indulgence, but a profound responsibility. It empowers you to act with integrity, to relate authentically, and to navigate life's complexities with grace. It doesn't make you impervious to pain or failure, but it equips you with the resilience to endure and the wisdom to learn. You stop, then, and ask yourself, what does it mean to truly know oneself? Is it an endpoint, a destination to be reached? Or is it a lifelong journey marked by moments of insight and periods of confusion? The kind of knowing that transforms is not static. It is fluid and evolving, shaped by experience but not defined by it. You stop to acknowledge that this journey inward is often invisible to others. It doesn't garner applause or admiration because it is internal and subtle. Yet, its effects ripple outward, influencing your actions, your relationships, and your presence in the world. The kind of power that arises from self-understanding is quiet but formidable. It is the power to choose your response rather than be swept away by circumstance. You stop to reflect on the role of external validation in your life. It doesn't disappear overnight, nor should it be rejected outright, but it doesn't hold the key to your transformation. The kind of validation that fuels lasting growth comes from within, from a steady, unwavering awareness of who you are beneath the surface noise. You stop because you realize that the work of self-understanding is never truly complete. It doesn't end with a certificate, a title, or a moment of enlightenment. It is an ongoing dialogue between your present self and your evolving self. The kind of dialogue that requires honesty and compassion, firmness and gentleness. You stop, finally, with a quiet resolve, to seek transformation not as an external conquest, but as an internal revolution. Not as an escape from yourself, but as a homecoming. The kind of transformation that begins in the silence where you meet yourself without disguise or defense. It doesn't promise ease or certainty, but it promises truth. You stop and begin. You stop to consider the wisdom of those who came before, the Stoics who mapped the terrain of the inner world with unflinching clarity. You seek a path inward, one marked not by fleeting passions or external chaos, but by reason and steady reflection. What does it mean, then, to embrace the Stoic journey inward? It is not an escape from life's challenges, but a confrontation with them through the lens of self-awareness and rational introspection. The kind of self-awareness the Stoics speak of is neither superficial nor boastful. It is a deliberate, disciplined gaze turned inward, a vigilant examination of your thoughts, your emotions, your impulses. You stop and ask, how often do I observe my mind without judgment, without the need to justify or condemn? The Stoic path demands this clarity, this impartial witness to your inner experience. Not because you seek to suppress or deny your feelings, but because you seek to understand them with precision and calm. You stop to recognize that emotions are not enemies to be conquered, but signals to be deciphered. The kind of rational introspection the Stoics advocate does not silence emotion. It tempers it, allowing reason to guide rather than be overwhelmed. You stop to see that every thought and feeling carries a message about your inner state, your values, your attachments. The challenge lies in listening without distortion, without the filters of bias or fear. You stop because this process is neither simple nor swift. The mind resists scrutiny, the heart resists exposure. The kind of courage required is quiet but profound. The courage to face the parts of yourself that are uncomfortable, contradictory, and imperfect. The Stoic is not a man or woman of denial but of acceptance. Not because they resign themselves to fate, but because they understand the limits of control and the power of choice. You stop to contemplate the Stoic teaching that external events are indifferent. They do not shape your true self unless you allow them to. The kind of freedom this insight offers is radical. It shifts your focus from what happens to you to how you respond. You stop to ask, do I invest my peace in things beyond my control? The answer, more often than not, reveals the root of unrest and suffering. You stop to see that rational introspection is the tool that carves out this freedom. It grants you the space to discern between what is within your power and what is not. The kind of clarity that arises from this discernment is a fortress against despair and impulsivity. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes life more navigable. You stop to appreciate that this inner work is the foundation of resilience. the ability to endure hardship without losing your center. You stop to recognize that self-awareness is not a passive state, but an active practice. The Stoics remind you that the mind, like a muscle, strengthens through exercise. Reflection is not a one-time event, but a continual process of observing, questioning, and correcting. You stop to wonder, how often do I engage in this practice? How often do I pause amid the noise to check the compass of my reason? You stop because you realize that the journey inward is also a journey toward wisdom. The kind of wisdom the Stoics cherish is practical, grounded in living well rather than abstract theorizing. It is the wisdom that teaches you to align your desires with reality, to cultivate virtues that sustain you through adversity. You stop to understand that self-awareness is the seed from which wisdom grows. You stop to consider how the Stoics teach that judgment distorts reality. The kind of judgment they caution against is not moral discernment, but the impulsive labeling of events as good or bad, desirable or detestable. You stop to recognize the subtle power of this habit, how it colors your experience and ensnares you in emotional turmoil. The kind of introspection they encourage disentangles you from these automatic judgments, inviting you instead to see things as they are. You stop to reflect on the role of detachment, not as cold indifference, but as a measured distance from the fluctuations of fortune and emotion. The Stoic does not abandon feeling, but refuses to be ruled by it. You stop to ask, can I observe my passions without becoming their prisoner? This question is at the heart of rational introspection. You stop to see that this discipline nurtures a kind of inner wisdom that is both steadfast and flexible. It is steadfast in its commitment to virtue and reason, flexible in its acceptance of life's unpredictability. The Stoic mind is like a well-tended garden, resilient in the face of storms because it is rooted deeply in understanding. You stop to acknowledge that the journey inward is not a solitary path of asceticism, but a communal endeavor. The Stoics remind you that self-awareness enhances your capacity to relate with others authentically and justly. The kind of clarity you cultivate within ripples outward, shaping your interactions and your influence. You stop to consider how rational introspection refines your judgments about others and the world, fostering empathy rather than judgment. You stop to realize that this journey demands patience and persistence. The mind will wander, the heart will resist. The kind of discipline required is not rigid but steadfast, a daily recommitment to turning inward with honesty and openness. You stop to embrace this challenge, knowing that each moment of mindful observation strengthens your capacity for self-mastery. You stop to remember that the Stoics offer no promises of a pain-free life. They offer instead a guide to endure pain with dignity and clarity. The kind of self-awareness they cultivate is a shield, not against suffering itself, but against the suffering caused by ignorance of oneself. You stop to see that this awareness transforms hardship into a teacher rather than a tormentor. You stop to appreciate that the Stoic journey inward is a continuous unfolding. It does not culminate in a final state of perfection, but in an ongoing commitment to growth and understanding. You stop to ask yourself, am I willing to walk this path, with all its challenges and revelations? The answer is the first step toward true transformation. You stop, then, and choose to cultivate this rational introspection, to observe your thoughts and emotions with a calm but discerning eye. You stop to listen to the inner voice that urges clarity over confusion, wisdom over impulse, acceptance over resistance. The kind of inner wisdom you seek is not a distant ideal, but a living presence within you, waiting to be acknowledged and nurtured. You stop to begin the practice of turning inward, not with judgment or haste, but with patience and care. The kind of self-awareness you cultivate becomes a lantern in the darkness, illuminating the path toward resilience, virtue, and authentic peace. It doesn't promise an easy journey, but it promises one of profound significance. You stop and take the first step into the quiet domain of your own reason, where transformation begins, not with noise or spectacle, but with the steady, unwavering light of self-knowledge. You stop to confront the truth that self-knowledge is not a comfortable companion. It does not flatter or soothe the ego. Instead, it challenges, unsettles, and demands. The kind of growth you seek requires an unyielding honesty, a willingness to face the parts of yourself that resist light. You stop to ask, am I prepared to look beyond the surface, to unravel the narratives I have woven about who I am and why I behave as I do? The journey inward exposes the patterns that govern your life, those invisible threads of thought and belief that shape your reactions and decisions. You stop and observe, which of these patterns serve me and which bind me? The kind of self-awareness that fosters growth is a mirror held up to these habitual responses, reflecting not only your strengths, but also your blind spots. Not because you seek to judge, but because you seek to understand. You stop to realize that many of these patterns stem from fear, attachment, or inherited beliefs. The kind of courage required to confront them is not bravado, but quiet resilience. The resilience to sit with discomfort rather than flee, to acknowledge limitations without despair. You stop to recognize that growth is not a matter of erasing flaws, but of transforming your relationship to them. You stop to see that honest reflection demands more than occasional introspection. It requires a sustained commitment to inquiry. The kind of inquiry that asks difficult questions without seeking quick answers. You stop to consider, do I shy away from this discomfort, or do I lean into it, knowing that beneath it lies the possibility of transformation? You stop to confront the unvarnished truth that not all beliefs or behaviors you hold are your own. They may be echoes of voices from your past, societal expectations, or defensive mechanisms forged in pain. The kind of self-knowledge that liberates disentangles you from these inherited chains, allowing you to claim ownership of your thoughts and actions. You stop to ask, which parts of me are truly mine and which are borrowed? You stop because this process is neither neat nor straightforward. It is messy, nonlinear, and often unsettling. The kind of honesty you cultivate reveals contradictions within yourself, strengths paired with vulnerabilities, confidence shadowed by doubt. You stop to accept that wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing complexity without judgment. You stop to recognize that this confrontation with self is not an end in itself, but a catalyst for change. The kind of change that arises from seeing yourself clearly is intentional and grounded. You stop to understand that growth is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming more fully who you already are, stripped of illusions and defenses. You stop to consider the role of discomfort in this process. The kind of discomfort that signals you are touching something vital, something resistant to change. You stop to resist the urge to escape or suppress this feeling, knowing that it is a signpost pointing toward deeper understanding. The kind of growth you seek is forged in the crucible of such moments. You stop to examine the stories you tell yourself about your limitations. The kind of stories that confine you to a narrow identity, preventing expansion. You stop to challenge these narratives, not with harshness, but with gentle inquiry. You ask, what if I am capable of more than I have allowed myself to believe? The answer opens a space for possibility. You stop to appreciate that self-knowledge is a dynamic process. It evolves as you evolve. The kind of reflection that serves you today may require revision tomorrow. You stop to embrace this fluidity, understanding that growth is not a destination but a continual unfolding. You stop to recognize that honest reflection also requires compassion. The kind of compassion that sees your flaws and mistakes without condemnation. You stop to cultivate this kindness toward yourself, knowing that it is the soil in which transformation takes root. Without it, self-knowledge becomes self-criticism and growth stalls. You stop to consider how this self-compassion extends outward. The clearer you become about your own struggles, the more empathy you cultivate for others. The kind of understanding that deepens relationships and fosters authentic connection. You stop to see that personal growth is never isolated. It weaves into the fabric of your life and your world. You stop to confront the temptation to seek quick fixes or easy answers. The kind of temptation that promises transformation without the labor of self-examination. You stop to reject this allure, knowing that true progress demands patience and persistence. The kind of growth you seek is gradual, built on the foundation of sustained honesty. You stop to reflect on the courage it takes to embrace your flaws and contradictions openly. The kind of courage that frees you from the need to perform or conceal. You stop to appreciate that this vulnerability is not weakness but strength, the strength to be seen as you truly are. You stop to recognize that the path of self-knowledge is solitary yet connected. It requires moments of solitude to delve deep, but it also enriches your engagement with others. The kind of clarity you gain illuminates your interactions, allowing you to respond with authenticity rather than reaction. You stop to ask yourself, am I willing to face the discomfort of honest reflection? Am I ready to hold the mirror steady, even when the reflection unsettles me? The kind of readiness that marks the threshold of growth. You stop and listen for the answer within. You stop to commit to this difficult but necessary work. To nurture self-awareness not as a fleeting exercise, but as a lifelong practice. The kind of practice that transforms not only how you see yourself, but how you live in the world. You stop and take the next step, knowing that honest reflection is the forge where the self is reshaped and renewed. You stop to acknowledge the internal obstacles that stand sentinel along the path of transformation: fear, ego, attachment. These are not distant specters, but intimate companions, woven into the fabric of your being. You stop to ask, how often do these shadows dictate my choices, my thoughts, my sense of self? The kind of awareness you cultivate must confront these barriers, not to annihilate them, but to understand their origin and influence. You stop to recognize fear's subtle tyranny. It doesn't always roar. Often, it whispers, stay safe, don't risk, hold on tight. The kind of fear that confines is not the sudden alarm, but the persistent undercurrent that shapes your actions from behind the scenes. You stop to see how this fear masquerades as caution or prudence, convincing you that avoidance equals survival. Yet, the kind of survival that fear enforces is a narrow existence, bound by invisible chains. You stop to see the ego's role, not as a villain, but as a guardian of identity, desperate to preserve a fragile narrative of self. The ego demands recognition, control, and validation. You stop to realize how attachment to this image creates resistance to change, as if transformation threatens to unravel your very existence. The kind of attachment that binds is not limited to possessions or relationships, but extends to beliefs, roles, and expectations you cling to as anchors in a turbulent world. You stop because these internal obstacles are cunning. They blend into your sense of normalcy. The kind of clarity you seek requires discerning these patterns with honesty and gentleness. You stop to ask, can I observe fear, ego, and attachment without becoming their prisoner? This is the threshold of freedom. You stop to remember the Stoic teaching that you are not your fears or your attachments. Rather, you are the observer who can choose how to relate to them. The kind of detachment they offer is not indifference, but mastery, a calm command over impulses and reactions. You stop to consider that this mastery is neither sudden nor effortless, but a gradual cultivation born of practice and patience. You stop to reflect on the power of acceptance in this process. Not passive resignation, but active acknowledgement of what is within and beyond your control. You stop to realize that fear, ego, and attachment lose their grip when you cease to resist their presence. The kind of acceptance that transforms is paradoxical. Embracing what is frees you to change what can be changed. You stop to see how fear, ego, and attachment distort your perceptions, clouding judgment and fueling suffering. The kind of suffering born of these distortions is unnecessary. It arises not from external events, but from your interpretation of them. You stop to question, how often have I been ensnared by my own mind, mistaking illusion for reality? You stop to acknowledge the courage required to disentangle yourself from these internal barriers. The kind of courage that is quiet yet unwavering. The courage to face discomfort without retreat. You stop to see that this courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. You stop to recognize the role of self-discipline in overcoming these obstacles. It is not a harsh punishment, but a deliberate alignment of your will with your deeper values. The kind of discipline you cultivate is a shield against impulsivity, a steady hand guiding you through the storms within. You stop to contemplate the importance of mindfulness in this endeavor. The kind of mindfulness that keeps you present to your inner landscape, noticing when fear or ego arise without judgment. You stop to appreciate that this awareness creates a space between stimulus and response, a space where choice becomes possible. You stop to remember that attachment often masquerades as love or necessity, binding you to people, things, or ideas with invisible chains. The kind of attachment that hinders is possessive and fearful of loss. You stop to ask, can I love freely without clinging? Can I hold values and relationships lightly, allowing them to change? You stop to realize that detachment is not abandonment, but a liberation. The kind of liberation that unshackles you from dependency on external conditions for your peace. You stop to understand that this liberation fosters resilience, enabling you to face uncertainty with equanimity. You stop to see that overcoming these internal obstacles is not an act of will alone, but a transformation of perspective. The kind of perspective that shifts from seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance to an active participant in your own growth. You stop to embrace this shift, knowing it requires humility and resolve. You stop to consider how fear, ego, and attachment often arise from a mistaken belief in permanence, that things, including the self, can remain unchanged. The kind of wisdom that counters this belief comes from recognizing impermanence as a fundamental truth. You stop to see that embracing impermanence dissolves the grip of these obstacles. You stop to reflect on the practice of reframing challenges as opportunities for growth. The kind of reframing that turns obstacles into teachers rather than threats. You stop to ask, how might fear invite courage? How might attachment reveal what I truly value? How might ego become a guide rather than a jailer? You stop to understand that this inner work is neither linear nor finite. It is a continual process of recognizing, accepting, and releasing. The kind of progress that is measured not by perfection, but by increasing freedom from internal bondage. You stop to acknowledge that the path through fear, ego, and attachment is often solitary, marked by moments of doubt and struggle. Yet, it is also a path of profound empowerment. The kind of empowerment that arises not from external validation, but from mastery over oneself. You stop to commit to this journey, knowing it demands patience, courage, and unwavering presence. The kind of commitment that transforms obstacles into stepping stones, barriers into gateways. You stop and step forward, carrying the resolve to meet your inner shadows with light and clarity. You stop to consider the stillness that lies beneath the surface of your restless mind, a quiet harbor amidst the storm of thoughts and emotions. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It waits patiently, accessible only to those willing to pause, to breathe, to withdraw from the cacophony of external demands. You stop and ask, how often do I grant myself this space of mindful reflection? The kind of stillness you seek is not mere absence of noise, but presence, a deliberate turning inward to observe, to understand, to be. You stop to recognize that in cultivating this stillness, you create a sanctuary for clarity to emerge. The kind of clarity that is obscured when the mind races or when emotions surge unchecked. You stop to see that without this space, decisions become reactions, and life's currents sweep you away rather than invite your steering hand. The kind of reflection that deepens self-understanding requires this deliberate pause, this act of stepping back. You stop to appreciate that stillness is not inertia but a dynamic state, a fertile ground where insight takes root. It doesn't promise answers immediately. Instead, it fosters a patient openness to what arises. You stop to wonder, am I willing to sit with uncertainty, with questions that have no quick resolution? The kind of courage required for this is quiet but profound. You stop to understand that mindful reflection sharpens your perception, allowing you to discern between what is essential and what is distraction. The kind of discernment that prevents you from being swept away by fleeting impulses or external pressures. You stop to see how often you have mistaken noise for signal, urgency for importance. The stillness you cultivate is a filter, refining your experience into meaningful awareness. You stop to realize that this practice of reflection is a form of dialogue, not with others, but with yourself. The kind of dialogue that requires honesty, patience, and a willingness to listen deeply. You stop to ask, do I listen to my inner voice with respect and attention, or do I drown it out with busyness and distraction? You stop because this inner dialogue reveals the layers of your being, some welcoming, others resistant. The kind of reflection that uncovers not only your desires and strengths, but also your fears and contradictions. You stop to meet these parts with openness rather than judgment. the kind of openness that invites integration rather than fragmentation. You stop to recognize that stillness cultivates presence, a groundedness in the here and now, the kind of presence that anchors you amidst uncertainty, enabling you to respond rather than react. You stop to consider how often your mind drifts to regrets of the past or anxieties about the future. The stillness you seek pulls you back to the immediacy of this moment, where true choice resides. You stop to appreciate that this presence is not passive acceptance, but active engagement. The kind of engagement that allows you to observe your thoughts and emotions without becoming entangled in them. You stop to see that this detachment is not disconnection, but clarity, an ability to witness without losing yourself. You stop to contemplate the relationship between stillness and decision-making. The kind of decisions that arise from clarity are deliberate, aligned with your values rather than impulsive. You stop to ask, how often have I made choices clouded by haste or confusion? The stillness you cultivate becomes the foundation for intentional living. You stop to realize that cultivating stillness is a practice in humility. It teaches you that you do not always have to act, that sometimes the most powerful response is to wait, to observe, to hold space. You stop to acknowledge that this patience is a form of strength, not weakness. You stop to see that the external world often demands speed and certainty, yet the inner world thrives in rhythm and depth. The kind of depth that cannot be rushed, that unfolds in its own time. You stop to resist the cultural impulse toward constant motion, embracing instead the wisdom of pause. You stop to recognize that reflection deepens your understanding of your own motivations and fears. The kind of understanding that dismantles automatic patterns and opens pathways to new possibilities. You stop to appreciate that this insight does not always bring comfort, but invariably brings freedom. You stop to consider how stillness enhances your capacity for empathy and connection. The kind of empathy that arises when you have listened deeply to yourself and thus can listen deeply to others. You stop to see that reflection fosters not isolation but authentic engagement. You stop to acknowledge the challenges of cultivating stillness, the restless mind, the intrusion of distraction, the discomfort of facing oneself without escape. The kind of challenges that require persistence and kindness toward yourself. You stop to commit to this practice, knowing its transformative power. You stop to recognize that stillness is not a destination but a continual return, a cycle of withdrawal and engagement. The kind of rhythm that sustains your inner clarity and resilience. You stop to embrace this ebb and flow as natural and necessary. You stop to ask, am I willing to embrace the silence within, to cultivate the stillness that sharpens my vision and strengthens my resolve? The kind of willingness that marks the threshold of deeper self-awareness. You stop and begin, drawing upon the quiet wellspring inside you. The kind of wellspring that, when tended, nourishes wisdom, patience, and strength. It doesn't shout, it whispers, inviting you to listen, to reflect, to become more fully present in your own life. You stop to reconsider the nature of leadership, not as a public spectacle or a mantle of authority, but as an intimate expression of self-understanding. The kind of leadership that endures is rooted not in charisma or command, but in integrity, emotional insight, and unwavering commitment to values forged through deep self-awareness. You stop to ask, what does it mean to lead authentically from a place of clarity within? You stop to recognize that authentic leadership begins with mastery over oneself. The kind of mastery that requires you to know your strengths and weaknesses, your fears and motivations, without illusion or denial. You stop to see that without this foundation, leadership becomes a fragile facade, easily shaken by external pressures or internal turmoil. You stop to understand that leadership, at its core, is an act of service, service to truth, to justice, to those who look to you for guidance. The kind of service that demands emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive and respond to the needs and feelings of others with empathy and discernment. You stop to consider, how well do I listen, not only to others, but to the unspoken currents beneath their words? You stop because emotional intelligence arises from self-awareness. You cannot truly understand others without first understanding yourself. The kind of self-awareness that reveals your biases, your triggers, your habitual responses. You stop to confront these not as faults to be hidden, but as aspects to be acknowledged and managed. The kind of management that transforms weakness into wisdom. You stop to see that integrity in leadership is the alignment of words and actions with deeply held values. The kind of alignment that demands consistency even when it is costly or inconvenient. You stop to ask, do my actions reflect the principles I claim to uphold, or do they bend to circumstance and approval? True leadership resists the temptation to compromise the self for fleeting gain. You stop to recognize that this integrity is not a rigid dogma, but a living commitment, flexible enough to adapt yet firm enough to remain true. The kind of commitment that invites reflection and revision without surrendering core convictions. You stop to embrace this dynamic balance as the hallmark of authentic leadership. You stop to acknowledge that leadership requires courage, not only to act boldly, but to be vulnerable. The kind of vulnerability that admits mistakes, embraces uncertainty, and invites collaboration rather than domination. You stop to see how vulnerability, far from weakness, creates space for trust and connection. You stop to consider the paradox that the most effective leaders are those who lead from a place of humility, aware of their limitations, and open to growth. The kind of humility that fosters resilience and invites others to contribute their strengths. You stop to reflect, does my leadership encourage others to flourish, or does it stifle their voices? You stop to realize that authentic leadership is not about control but influence, quiet, consistent, and grounded in example. The kind of influence that arises naturally when your presence embodies the virtues you espouse. You stop to appreciate that people follow not because they are compelled, but because they are inspired by your authenticity. You stop to question the source of your motivation to lead. Is it the desire for recognition, power, or approval? Or is it a deeper call to serve and to contribute meaningfully? The kind of motivation that sustains you through challenges and setbacks. You stop to realign yourself with this purpose. You stop to recognize that leadership is a continuous journey of self-discovery and growth. The kind of journey that requires ongoing reflection, humility, and discipline. You stop to commit to this path, knowing that leadership is not a role to be claimed, but a responsibility to be earned anew each day. You stop to see that the influence you wield is inseparable from the clarity you cultivate within. The kind of clarity that dispels confusion, resolves conflict, and inspires trust. You stop to understand that without inner clarity, leadership falters. With it, leadership shines. You stop to embrace the solitude that accompanies authentic leadership, a solitude not of isolation but of centeredness. The kind of solitude that allows you to hear your own voice amid the noise, to make decisions grounded in principle rather than pressure. You stop to nurture this solitude as essential to your leadership. You stop to consider how your leadership affects not only immediate circumstances, but the broader fabric of relationships and communities. The kind of impact that reverberates beyond the moment, shaping culture and legacy. You stop to ask, am I mindful of this influence, and do I steward it responsibly? You stop to recognize that leadership demands balance, the balance between confidence and humility, action and reflection, authority and empathy. The kind of balance that emerges from deep self-understanding and disciplined practice. You stop to cultivate this balance as your guiding principle. You stop to acknowledge that authentic leadership is less about titles or positions and more about presence and purpose. The kind of presence that commands respect through authenticity, not performance. You stop to commit to embodying this presence in all aspects of your life. You stop to reflect that true leadership is a mirror of your inner state. The kind of leadership that cannot be faked or feigned because it flows naturally from who you are. You stop to choose to cultivate the inner qualities that will allow you to lead with wisdom, courage, and compassion. You stop and step forward into this responsibility, carrying the understanding that authentic leadership begins within. It doesn't rely on control or charisma, but on the quiet strength of self-mastery and the unwavering commitment to live your values. The kind of leadership that transforms not only others, but yourself. You stop to contemplate the nature of self-reliance, not as isolation, but as the profound freedom that arises from knowing oneself deeply and trusting that inner foundation. The kind of self-reliance that does not depend on the shifting opinions of others or the validation of external achievements. You stop to ask, How much of my peace is tethered to the approval or disapproval of those around me? The answer reveals the subtle chains that bind your spirit. You stop to recognize that true self-reliance is cultivated through the steady practice of Stoic wisdom, the wisdom that teaches you to distinguish between what you can control and what you cannot. The kind of distinction that frees you from the tyranny of circumstance and the fickleness of fortune. You stop to see that this freedom is not granted by the world but earned within, through discipline and clarity. You stop to see that self-reliance is a refuge in the tempest, a steadfast anchor when external conditions shift unpredictably. The kind of anchor not built from rigidity, but from adaptability rooted in inner strength. You stop to ask, can I remain steady in the face of uncertainty, or do I sway with every gust of opinion and event? You stop to understand that cultivating self-reliance requires a deep trust in your own reason and values. The kind of trust that grows not from arrogance, but from intimate knowledge of your capacities and limits. You stop to appreciate that this trust allows you to act with confidence, even when the path ahead is unclear. You stop to realize that dependence on others' approval is a fragile foundation, the kind of dependence that leaves you vulnerable to disappointment and loss. You stop to embrace instead the solidity that comes from self-acceptance and inner validation, the kind of acceptance that whispers, I am enough, regardless of circumstance. You stop to consider how self-reliance nurtures tranquility, the profound calm that arises when you cease to battle the uncontrollable. The kind of tranquility not born from indifference, but from wise engagement with life's realities. You stop to ask, do I resist what is beyond my power, or do I meet it with equanimity? You stop to recognize that this tranquility is not a passive state, but an active stance, an assertion of your sovereignty over your own mind and heart. The kind of sovereignty that refuses to surrender to fear, doubt, or external chaos. You stop to embrace this sovereignty as your birthright. You stop to see that self-reliance is a practice, not a destination. The kind of practice that calls for daily recommitment to inner clarity and discipline. You stop to ask, how often do I cultivate this inner fortress, reinforcing it against the erosion of distraction and doubt? You stop to acknowledge that self-reliance does not mean rejecting connection or support, the kind of connection that enriches and sustains. You stop to understand that true self-reliance flourishes not in isolation but in harmony with others, grounded in a secure sense of self. You stop to reflect on the courage required to stand alone when necessary, to hold your values and convictions without wavering, the kind of courage that is quiet but resolute. You stop to appreciate that this courage is strengthened through self-knowledge and discipline. You stop to realize that self-reliance empowers you to navigate life's uncertainties with composure and grace. The kind of empowerment that arises from knowing that your well-being does not depend on external approval or circumstance. You stop to embrace this empowerment as a source of resilience. You stop to consider how self-reliance shapes your relationships, not through neediness or dependency, but through generosity and presence. The kind of presence that comes from being whole within yourself. You stop to see that this wholeness invites authentic connection rather than attachment. You stop to recognize the role of self-discipline in fostering self-reliance, the kind of discipline that aligns your actions with your highest values, even when it is difficult or unpopular. You stop to ask, am I willing to hold myself accountable with kindness and firmness? You stop to contemplate the freedom that self-reliance brings, the freedom to choose your path, your response, your attitude. The kind of freedom that is not the absence of constraint, but the mastery of self-direction. You stop to cherish this freedom as the essence of your power. You stop to see that cultivating self-reliance requires you to confront your fears and doubts, not to be defeated by them, but to learn from them. The kind of confrontation that deepens your understanding and strengthens your resolve. You stop to welcome this challenge as an opportunity for growth. You stop to acknowledge that self-reliance is inseparable from humility, the recognition of your interconnectedness and your limitations. The kind of humility that fosters wisdom rather than weakness. You stop to balance strength with openness. You stop to reflect that the path of self-reliance is not solitary, but intertwined with the lives of others. The kind of interdependence that honors your autonomy while embracing community. You stop to nurture this balance as a vital part of your journey. You stop to commit to cultivating this inner strength, not as a fortress against the world, but as a foundation from which to engage it fully and freely. The kind of engagement that honors your values and your vulnerability. You stop and step forward, carrying the quiet certainty that true power arises from mastery of oneself, a power no external force can diminish. You stop to gather the threads of this journey inward, the moments of silence, of clarity, of courage. You see now that self-understanding is not a mere concept, but a living force, transformative and profound. It is the foundation upon which lasting change is built, the wellspring from which true strength flows. You stop to ask, have I embraced this power within, or have I sought it in the shifting sands of circumstance? It doesn't come from control over others, nor from external triumphs. True power begins with mastery over oneself, the steady command of mind and heart, the calm amidst turmoil, the unwavering presence in the face of uncertainty. You stop to recognize that this mastery is not bestowed but cultivated through relentless commitment to truth and discipline. You stop to reflect that the kind of transformation you seek is less a destination and more a continuous unfolding. It is the gradual emergence of clarity from confusion, courage from fear, wisdom from experience. The kind of transformation that reshapes not only your actions, but your very perception of self and world. You stop to understand that this inner revolution requires embracing paradox, the coexistence of strength and vulnerability, certainty and doubt, persistence and surrender. You stop to see that these tensions are not obstacles, but the crucible in which your character is forged. You stop to acknowledge that self-awareness is both a mirror and a lamp. It reflects your deepest truths and illuminates the path ahead. The kind of illumination that guides you through darkness, not by banishing it, but by teaching you to navigate with steady eyes. You stop to appreciate that the journey to self-mastery is not solitary in the sense of isolation, but in the sense of personal responsibility. The kind of responsibility that calls you to own your choices, your growth, your healing. You stop to accept that no one can undertake this path for you. You stop to consider the transformative power of this responsibility. It is the power to break free from the shackles of external validation, to find peace in your own being, and to live with authenticity and purpose. You stop to ask, am I ready to claim this power, to live by it daily? You stop to see that this power manifests in your relationships, your work, your presence in the world. It is not a force to dominate, but a light to inspire. The kind of influence that arises naturally when you lead from a place of inner clarity and integrity. You stop to embrace the ongoing nature of this work, knowing that self-understanding deepens with each reflection, with each challenge met, with each moment of stillness. The kind of deepening that transforms your very experience of life, infusing it with meaning and resilience. You stop to recognize that the path you walk is not easy. It demands patience, courage, and unwavering commitment. Yet the rewards are profound: freedom from self-deception, clarity of purpose, and the quiet strength to face whatever comes. You stop to invite yourself to continue this journey with openness and resolve, carrying the wisdom that true power and transformation arise not from outside, but from within. You stop to breathe in this truth, letting it settle deep into your being. You stop and step forward, embracing the transformative power within, the power that has always been yours, waiting patiently beneath the noise, ready to guide you toward the life you were meant to live.